Had some concerns about whether or not having one wife would be enough for him because he...
Welcome back to my channel. The carefully polished image of the Brown family is starting to crack in ways fans never expected. For years, viewers were told that plural marriage was simply about faith, sacrifice, and family unity. But behind the smiles, emotional interviews, and picture-perfect reality TV moments, critics and former insiders have raised disturbing questions about how some polygamous families survive financially while supporting enormous households. Investigations into extremist sects connected to plural marriage have uncovered allegations involving welfare manipulation, strategic divorces, hidden assets, and complicated legal loopholes. Suddenly, the lifestyle that once looked unconventional but harmless is being examined under a much darker spotlight. Former members claim certain groups perfected systems that allowed multiple women to legally appear as single mothers while still living under one patriarchal structure. According to those accusations, families could qualify for housing assistance, Medicaid, food programs, and tax benefits simultaneously, creating streams of financial support flowing into one shared network. While supporters argue these are isolated cases, critics insist the problem has existed for decades behind closed doors. And once reality television brought polygamy into mainstream America, many believe the secrecy became impossible to maintain. The biggest shock of all is that some of these alleged systems may not technically violate the law in the ways people assume. By avoiding legal marriages and relying instead on spiritual unions, families created a gray area where authorities struggled to prove criminal wrongdoing. That legal ambiguity became the foundation for one of the most controversial debates surrounding modern polygamy in America today. What makes this story even more explosive is the growing belief that plural marriage evolved into far more than a religious practice for some communities. Critics now argue that certain groups transformed it into a carefully structured financial strategy capable of generating enormous economic advantages. Instead of one household with one legal spouse and shared taxes, these networks allegedly operated as multiple independent households connected under one patriarch. Each woman could file taxes separately, apply for benefits separately, and even build independent credit histories while still contributing to a larger family structure behind the scenes. Former investigators have claimed that this system allowed some families to multiply government assistance and reduce tax burdens in ways ordinary households simply could not. Public records surrounding various polygamous sects, including groups investigated in Utah and Arizona, have fueled ongoing speculation about how widespread these financial arrangements truly became. Even the Brown family has faced public scrutiny over bankruptcy filings, property ownership changes, and legal restructurings that fans dissected for years online. While none of this automatically proves wrongdoing, it intensified public curiosity about how reality TV stars supporting massive families manage their finances. Critics say the entire structure rewards secrecy, legal maneuvering, and complicated asset distribution. Supporters argue they are being unfairly targeted for living differently. But as more court documents, tax records, and insider testimony surface, the conversation surrounding plural marriage continues shifting away from romance and spirituality and toward money, power, and survival. One of the most controversial aspects of modern polygamy is the legal strategy that keeps many families out of prison despite anti-polygamy laws existing across America. The key difference lies in legal marriage versus spiritual marriage. Most modern plural families only register one legal marriage with the state, while the remaining relationships exist solely through religious ceremonies without legal recognition. That distinction changes everything. In the eyes of the law, authorities often see unmarried adults cohabiting rather than one man illegally married to multiple women. Critics argue this loophole created the perfect shield for complicated financial arrangements because it became extremely difficult for prosecutors to prove bigamy in court. Even when families openly describe themselves as plural households on television, proving criminal intent is another challenge entirely. The Brown family became one of the most public examples of this structure after Cody Brown legally divorced Mary Brown, so he could legally marry Robin Brown and adopt her children. While the family framed the move as emotional and necessary, many observers saw it as a calculated legal maneuver demonstrating how fluid these arrangements could become. Law enforcement agencies reportedly struggled for years with how to approach polygamous families because prosecutions often collapsed unless additional crimes like fraud, abuse, or neglect were involved. Critics say the system effectively allowed plural marriage to continue in plain sight while remaining technically protected under religious freedom arguments. Supporters insist adults should be free to structure relationships however they choose. But the deeper authorities looked into financial and legal arrangements, the more questions emerged about whether certain communities were operating far beyond simple religious beliefs. The image most Americans still carry about polygamy involves isolated desert compounds and women in prairie dresses, but modern plural families reportedly adapted to mainstream society in ways that make them almost invisible. According to former members and investigators, many polygamist households now blend seamlessly into suburban neighborhoods across the country. They drive regular cars, send children to public schools, shop at big retail stores, and participate in local communities without drawing attention to their private family structures. Some families reportedly maintain separate homes for different wives in nearby neighborhoods, creating the appearance of ordinary divorced or blended families instead of organized plural households. Critics say this compartmentalization became essential for survival because it reduced suspicion while allowing families to continue operating privately. Children were allegedly taught from a young age never to discuss the true nature of their household with outsiders, referring to other wives as aunts or family friends. Former members describe living double lives where one reality existed inside the home while another was presented publicly. As technology advanced, these communities allegedly became even more sophisticated. Secure messaging apps, digital banking, and private online networks reportedly allowed plural families spread across multiple states to coordinate finances, communicate secretly, and maintain family ties without relying on isolated compounds anymore. Critics argue the secrecy creates environments where manipulation and financial exploitation thrive undetected. Supporters insist these families simply want privacy from public judgment. But the more these hidden networks are discussed online, the more Americans realize plural marriage may exist much closer to mainstream society than anyone previously imagined. Everything changed the moment Sister Wives premiered on television. Before the show, many plural families lived quietly outside public attention, avoiding cameras and government scrutiny. But once Cody Brown introduced his household to millions of viewers, the underground world of modern polygamy was suddenly dragged into the national spotlight. According to reports at the time, Utah authorities quickly opened investigations into the Brown family's lifestyle, examining whether anti-polygamy laws had been violated. The Browns claimed they feared prosecution and eventually relocated to Nevada, a move that became one of the central storylines of the series. Critics believe that public exposure terrified other polygamist communities because reality television accidentally revealed how these families functioned behind closed doors. Every episode documenting finances, relationships, property arrangements, and family logistics provided outsiders with unprecedented insight into plural marriage structures. Former investigators allegedly began connecting patterns involving property ownership, tax filings, and benefit claims more aggressively after the show gained popularity. What made the situation even more controversial was that the Brown family eventually transformed their legal battles into national political discussions about religious freedom and personal liberty. Supporters praised them for humanizing plural families. Critics accuse them of normalizing systems built on secrecy and manipulation. Either way, the publicity permanently changed how America viewed polygamy. For the first time, audiences weren't just hearing rumors about hidden communities in remote areas. They were watching an openly plural family navigate everyday life in real time, and that visibility created consequences no one fully anticipated. Behind every headline about plural marriage are the children raised inside these complicated family systems, and former members say their experiences are often far darker than television portrays. Critics argue that many polygamous children grow up struggling with identity confusion, emotional neglect, and secrecy from an early age. In some communities, children are allegedly coached never to reveal the true structure of their household to teachers, classmates, or doctors. Former insiders describe the exhausting pressure of maintaining separate identities at home and in public, constantly filtering conversations to avoid exposing the family. Mental health experts studying former members have reported high rates of anxiety, depression, and trust issues among those who eventually leave plural communities. Education is another major concern. Some groups reportedly limit outside schooling, especially for girls, focusing heavily on obedience, domestic roles, and religious teachings instead of academic development. Critics argue that isolation leaves many young adults unprepared for independent life outside the community. Financial exploitation allegations add another disturbing layer to the controversy. Former members claim children were sometimes viewed less as individuals and more as economic assets connected to government assistance, tax benefits, or labor within family businesses. Medical neglect accusations have also surfaced in various investigations involving isolated sex, with claims that families avoided hospitals or concealed family relationships to protect secrecy. Supporters strongly reject broad generalizations and insist loving, healthy plural families absolutely exist. But the testimonies from former members continue fueling national concern about what happens to children raised inside closed systems where loyalty, silence, and obedience are prioritized above everything else. Perhaps the most shocking allegations connected to isolated polygamous sex involve genetics and intermarriage. Medical researchers studying certain closed communities in Utah and Arizona documented unusually high rates of rare inherited disorders linked to limited gene pools and generations of intermarriage. One condition repeatedly discussed by specialists is fumarase deficiency, an extremely rare genetic disorder associated with severe developmental disabilities and neurological complications. Researchers examining isolated FLDS populations found rates significantly higher than what normally appears in the general population. Critics argue that community leaders ignored or concealed these growing medical concerns for decades while continuing practices that increased genetic risks. Former members describe cultures where mainstream science and genetic counseling were discouraged, leaving many families unaware of the long-term consequences tied to repeated bloodline marriages. Some children born with severe disabilities reportedly required lifelong medical care funded largely through government assistance programs. These allegations intensified public outrage because critics claimed taxpayers ultimately carried the financial burden created by systems resistant to outside medical oversight. Supporters of plural communities argue that sensational media coverage unfairly paints all polygamous families with the same brush and ignores countless healthy children raised in loving homes. Still, the medical documentation surrounding certain isolated sects created one of the most disturbing chapters in America's modern polygamy debate. The combination of secrecy, religious control, and genetic isolation raised ethical questions far beyond relationship structures alone. For many outsiders, these revelations transformed plural marriage from a controversial lifestyle choice into something much more alarming and difficult to defend publicly. As investigators followed financial trails connected to plural communities, they reportedly uncovered business structures far more sophisticated than most Americans imagined. Former insiders described networks where multiple wives operated businesses, held property, managed investments, and accessed separate credit systems that collectively built enormous wealth under one extended family structure. Critics argue this arrangement created powerful financial advantages because assets could be spread across numerous legal identities instead of remaining attached to one household. One wife might run a catering business while another owned rental properties, another handled childcare operations, and another managed online sales. Individually, each business appeared modest. Together, they reportedly generated major collective income streams supporting large plural networks. Public records connected to prominent polygamous families, including the Browns, fueled online speculation about how these financial systems operated across multiple states. Complex property ownership changes, LLCs, mortgages, and business filings created webs that outsiders struggled to fully understand. Former members claim some communities functioned almost like corporate organizations disguised as religious groups, where financial planning dominated discussions more than spirituality itself. International operations reportedly added another layer of sophistication, with certain families maintaining property and business interests in Mexico or Canada, where legal environments surrounding plural marriage were less hostile. Critics argue plural marriage evolved into a business strategy designed to maximize credit access, minimize taxes, and protect assets from legal exposure. Supporters insist these families are simply entrepreneurial and unfairly targeted because of their beliefs. But as more former insiders speak publicly, the financial side of modern polygamy continues attracting increasing scrutiny from both investigators and the public. The rise of the internet may ultimately become the single greatest threat modern polygamous communities ever faced. For generations, isolation protected these groups from outside influence, but social media shattered those walls completely. Young adults raised in plural households now have access to outside perspectives, education, and support networks that previous generations never experienced. Former members who once feared speaking publicly are now sharing personal stories online about manipulation, secrecy, financial exploitation, and emotional trauma. Critics say every person who leaves a closed polygamous system becomes a potential witness capable of exposing years of hidden practices. Authorities reportedly gained new tools as well. Digital banking records, online transactions, social media activity, and electronic communications create evidence trails impossible to erase completely. Investigators no longer rely solely on physical surveillance or insider testimony because technology now maps relationships, finances, and business structures automatically. At the same time, American culture itself is changing. As society becomes more accepting of alternative relationships generally, critics argue that polygamist groups can no longer rely entirely on claims of religious persecution to shield themselves from scrutiny. The public conversation shifted away from simply asking whether plural marriage should exist and toward examining allegations involving fraud, abuse, and exploitation inside certain communities. Former polygamous children with college educations and professional careers are now speaking publicly against the systems they grew up in, providing insights law enforcement allegedly struggled to obtain for decades. The silence surrounding modern polygamy is breaking apart faster than many community leaders ever anticipated. Today, the debate surrounding plural marriage has become larger and more explosive than ever before. What once seemed like a private religious lifestyle hidden in isolated communities has evolved into a national conversation involving legal loopholes, government benefits, hidden business empires, child welfare concerns, and growing public scrutiny. The Brown family's decision to bring their world onto reality television may have permanently transformed how America sees modern polygamy. Supporters still argue that consenting adults should have the freedom to structure families however they choose without government interference. Critics counter that too many allegations involving fraud, secrecy, and exploitation continue surfacing to ignore. Investigators, former insiders, journalists, and online communities are now piecing together decades of hidden history that many believe remained protected by silence for far too long. The most powerful force driving this shift may not be prosecutors or politicians at all. It may be the next generation of former polygamous children who are finally telling their stories publicly. Their testimonies are reshaping public perception faster than any television show ever could. Whether modern polygamy ultimately survives, adapts, or collapses under legal and social pressure remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. The world behind the sister wives' cameras is no longer hidden from public view. And as more former members continue speaking out, the future of plural marriage in America may change forever.